So, thank you for joining us today. It's great to see so many people tuning in, and welcome if you're watching this webinar pre-recorded at a later date. Um, my name is Dr. Ellen Craig. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work with the Hertfordshire Community Perinatal Mental Health Team, for those of you who don't know me. This morning, I'm going to be talking a little bit about looking after our mood during lockdown. So we know this is a really tricky time at the moment. A lot of people are struggling with different things. And this morning, we're going to have a bit of a focus on protecting against low mood during lockdown. So I'm going to share my presentation with you. Okay. All right, there we go. So I quite liked this picture of a little lamb there, sort of frolicking around in his field. I'm not sure that any of us are feeling quite that carefree at the moment. Perhaps if you are lucky enough to have some fields nearby that you could go and frolic in, you could go and have a little go. But I did like his little happy, joyful leap. Okay, so I wanted to start off by just inviting everyone to reflect for a second on what we normally do to lift our mood. So if we're feeling a bit down, we've had a bad day or a bad week, what do we tend to turn to lift our mood? And the chances are it might be something along the lines of meeting up with a friend, visiting family, having a bit of a hug with your family, going to a baby group, going for a drink at the pub, take the baby to the park for a walk to feed the ducks, going to the gym maybe, going out for a fancy coffee, doing a bit of window shopping, going for a day out, getting some time to yourself. So it could be something amongst that list there. But as you've probably clocked, I'm mentioning those things because obviously at the moment we're really restricted in what we can do. And we can't do a lot of what we'd normally do to lift our mood. It's a really stressful time. A lot of people are very worried. It's a very normal response to feel worried and stressed at the moment. But with worry and stress can often come low mood. So those two things together make a bit of a perfect storm for kind of increasing the risk of us feeling a bit low or becoming a bit depressed. It can make depression worse if you're somebody who's already struggling with depression, or it can lead to low mood in others of us who are vulnerable or may even not be vulnerable. And so this is why we're thinking a little bit about this, where we're keen to focus on it, because I really think we need to be looking after our mood now more than ever in quite a preventative way. So we know that our mood and our behaviour are really strongly linked. And crucially, we know that what we do is really important. It really impacts on our mood. So the way we choose to spend our time impacts hugely on how we feel. And you've probably noticed this at other times. Perhaps there have been times when you haven't been able to use your normal coping strategies, or you haven't had the motivation to, or the energy to. And actually, perhaps you've noticed that that's left you feeling a little bit more down, or with a little bit more time on your hands for worry or negative thoughts. And at the moment, as we've touched on already, we can't do a lot of the things that we would have normally done to lift the mood, things that we would have turned to give us a bit of a boost. We are quite restricted. There may be some super things that you've got on your repertoire of things to lift your mood that you can do from home, which is fantastic. So maybe a film on the sofa, or a cuddle with the baby, or reading a bedtime story to your toddler. There may be a few things that you can do from home, and that's great. And we're going to be thinking a lot about what those things might be a little bit later on. I also just wanted to point out that this is also true of children too, from toddlers, teenagers. The same kind of dynamics apply to them too. And also, we're all aware that everybody's routines have changed right now. And also just to mention this other dynamic, which is that we know that parents' low mood can also impact on our children, and vice versa as well. So you may have noticed on a day when perhaps you've had a bad night before, you don't have much energy, you're feeling really quite fed up, perhaps a bit run down. You might have noticed that a toddler or an older child might pick up on that and their behaviour might change. And it usually changes in a bit of a difficult way. So they might be making more of an attempt to connect with you through tantruming or being quite clingy. So we know that kind of adds another layer. So if we're feeling a bit down, that does really impact on our kids, and it can change their behaviour and make parenting harder as well. Okay. All right, so I just wanted to show you this cycle. I've mentioned some of these already today, but just to kind of put that into a little diagram for you. So we know that at the moment we are having to be a bit less active than normal, and we're probably not able to use our normal coping strategies, which means there's less opportunity for us to enjoy things, and we may not do things that are meaningful for us. And it also gives us a bit more time for worry and rumination as well. So we can quite quickly end up feeling quite low, quite fed up, quite worried and stressed, which has a knock-on impact on our motivation levels. Our energy and our enthusiasm reduces as well. So you've probably noticed, at times when you have felt low or felt a bit more anxious than normal, your motivation is often quite low, and energy levels are also impacted as well. So that makes it even more difficult to be active and to use our normal coping strategies. So we can end up caught in a bit of a vicious cycle like this. And this is what I'm going to be trying to think about, how to avoid this morning. I also just wanted to draw out how the children can be involved in this as well, how babies and toddlers can be involved in this too. So if we're a bit less active than normal, we're not able to use our normal coping strategies, there's also fewer options for entertaining and exercising the kids. Less options for outings or to go, for example, to baby groups with your little ones. And if you happen to have a 5 or 6 year old boy, as I do, you'll know how much they need to be exercised and entertained. So again, that's just kind of another layer of challenges that we're facing at the moment. And if you're finding that there's fewer opportunities to do things you can enjoy, fewer opportunities to do things that are meaningful for you, babies and children may notice you being a little bit more distant than normal, perhaps a little bit less connected. And this is an entirely understandable and normal response to a very difficult situation. But it can have another knock-on impact. And I'm sure that we're all familiar with the effect of feeling a little bit fed up, a little bit low perhaps, or stressed, that we do end up feeling with less patience for the children. We can be snappy, we can be irritable with them. We're less present with them, and it's harder to enjoy them, which isn't to say that they're enjoyable all the time, but it's harder to find those moments of enjoyment that we would otherwise. And similarly, if our motivation and energy and enthusiasm has reduced a bit, again, the kids might feel that sort of slight change in our levels of connection with them. And again, it will impact on their behaviour, possibly impact on their behaviour. And then we can get that other layer that we're probably all familiar with as well, that sense of guilt, sense of kind of not doing enough with them, not being with them enough, not having enough time or headspace for them. So again, that sort of introduces yet another layer to this cycle. So I just wanted to to kind of think through that as well. There is this other layer going on for us as well at the moment. Okay, so we need to think slightly differently about how we're spending our time during lockdown and how we're engaging with our admittedly more limited environments. And today I'm going to be thinking about these 4 golden rules to better mood. So these little golden rules are very well established in the research around low mood. And we know that these things are really essential to having good mood, good kind of stable mood. And these 4 rules are doing things that you can take a sense of pleasure from, doing things that you can take a sense of achievement from, connecting with others, and some sort of exercise and physical activity. And we all need a mix of these 4 things in our days. And as you will no doubt have noticed, all these 4 things are challenging under lockdown at the moment. So this differs a little bit for different people. Some people need more pleasure and slightly less achievement. Some people need a little bit more achievement and less pleasure. And indeed, some people may take their sense of pleasure from achievement. So as we go through the slides this morning, I would really encourage you just to kind of reflect on what you feel that you need in your days, what the balance is that's right for you, and you'll have a sense of that. I'm going to start off, I'm going to start off by looking at the positive spiral here. So this is what we're aiming for. And if we can apply those 4 golden rules, which are really the foundations of good mood, we can apply those 4 golden rules in a way that works for us. We can kick off this positive spiral. So we'll be able to find things to do that protect our mood. And this may be things with the baby or with the kids that everybody can enjoy. If we're doing things that are important to us and that are pleasurable for us, meaningful, we're more occupied, there's less time for us to worry. And similarly, baby and children are likely to be a bit more occupied too. If the knock-on impact of that is that you're feeling a little bit more lifted, a little bit more positive, babies and children are going to pick up on that feeling. They're going to notice you being a bit more relaxed, and they're likely to relax themselves, perhaps be a bit less needy of you. Makes parenting a bit easier. And again, that's likely to help increase those levels of motivation and energy and enthusiasm. So you've got more energy to connect with the kids. You've got more energy to contain and regulate them. And I'm going to be thinking a little bit more about those concepts in the final webinar in the series in a couple of weeks' time. But I think one of our main tasks as parents, which is going to be really challenging at the moment, it's another challenge at the moment, is being able to contain the kids' emotions and help them regulate their own emotions. So whether that's a day-old baby to a teenager, one of our main tasks as parents is to help them regulate their own emotions, help them understand what their emotions are, to help them label it, and to kind of show them what to do about it. And that can be really draining. If we're not feeling like we're firing on all cylinders, having to soothe and regulate a tantruming toddler is really, really challenging. So if we are feeling a bit more positive, a bit more lifted, and we've got a bit of headspace for that job, then it's going to set us up much better at the moment. Okay, all right. So we're coming on to think about this idea of pleasure now. So we need to be specifically scheduling into our days things that we can enjoy doing, things that we can take a sense of pleasure from. I quite like the idea of thinking about making sure that we're doing things that we want to do, as well as those things that we have to do. Because I'm sure that a lot of us are familiar with that sense of childcare taking up a lot of our days. The basic kind of childcare tasks can really wipe out a lot of our days. So it's really, really important, particularly at the moment, to be thinking about making sure that we're doing things that we want to do. So having a bit of a think about this, a bit of a reflect on this, what what can you take pleasure in at the moment? What can you enjoy? What are the little tasks that you can enjoy, the little things that you can enjoy? And as I've set out here, we're going to need to be a bit creative about this, I think, and also important to focus in on the little things. So lighting a candle in the evening, or making a nice coffee, or cooking your favourite meal, or tucking yourself up in bed with your favourite box set programme. The little things are good because they're accessible, because we can get them into our day. We're more likely to be able to squeeze them in around the childcare tasks and the other demands on us at the moment. The homeschooling, the working from home, the supporting the partner. There's an awful lot on everyone's plates at the moment. So the little things are the things that are going to work, I think. And you might like to think about this in terms of splitting these activities into things that you enjoy doing with the kids or with the children or the baby, and then also things that you can enjoy doing on your own, because it's going to be really important to get some space and some time to yourself at the moment, which again is really hard to do. I wanted to just talk specifically for a second about the perinatal period. So this is antenatally and postnatally, and the challenges with finding things that you can enjoy and also scheduling them in during the perinatal period, as well as being under lockdown. So we know that the perinatal period is a huge time of adjustment and role transition and flux. Roles are changing significantly. You're really having to discover who you are as a mother. If that's your first baby, or even if it's your second or third child, it's still going to be a period of adjustment and figuring out how this works, what this family looks like, what does my role look like as a new mum or mum to another new baby. And there are some really significant challenges to seeking that enjoyment and pleasure in the perinatal period. There are some huge sources of pleasure in the baby and those lovely moments we can enjoy. But there are also these huge challenges, and we're never going to enjoy every moment. It's tough work. And there are some really kind of key things that can be barriers to us taking a sense of enjoyment and pleasure. For example, lack of sleep, having a very dependent little one, perhaps a colicky baby, and preoccupation with other things that are going to be on your mind in the antenatal period, or as a new mum, for example, feeding, and getting your head around all the changes that are going on all the time for a little one. And as I touched on earlier, just the basics of childcare can take up most of the day. So carving out time for this kind of stuff is a huge challenge. And on top of that, we may have to figure out what we find enjoyable and pleasurable all over again in this new role with a baby who may be permanently attached to us or in our arms. So it's worth taking a little bit of time to reflect on that. What are the things that you enjoy now, that you can enjoy now, and they're likely to have changed. Okay, so I'd like you to use your imagination a little bit and just imagine that these are jars of marbles. I didn't do a good job with the clip art here, but anyway, these are jars of marbles. If you look at the picture of the jar on the left, that's just got the black marbles in there. So these black marbles represent tasks and chores, daily jobs that just have to be done every day. The load of washing, the unstacking the dishwasher, the umpteen nappy changes and changes of clothes. These are the tasks that have to be done in the day. And they're not hugely enjoyable things. You might get moments of pleasure from them, which will be lovely, but generally speaking, these aren't going to be hugely enjoyable things. So if this jar with these black marbles in represents your day, it doesn't look particularly inspiring right now. You're not going to wake up in the morning and look at that day and be raring to go and be full of motivation and enthusiasm. You're just not. Now, if we take the jar on the right and we imagine that we've got the same number of black marbles in there, so we've got the same number of chores and jobs that have to be done, but we've also got some yellow marbles in there, and the yellow marbles, you might have guessed, are the little activities that we can enjoy doing, the things we can take a sense of pleasure from. And there's as many yellow marbles as black marbles in there. Now, contemplating that day is a bit nicer. It's a bit easier to wake up in the morning to that day, I would guess. So this is the effect that we're trying to achieve by just trying to fit in the little things that you can enjoy that are a bit nice around the tasks that just have to be done. So I hope you can maybe hold that in mind and try and put some yellow marbles in your jar every day. Okay, so this is a pleasant events list. It's a very short, abbreviated pleasant events list. Now, if you Google a pleasant events list or an enjoyable events list, you get lots of results. There's a lot of these kind of lists out there, and they're often based on quite large-scale research projects where researchers who are looking at mood have gone and interviewed often thousands of people and asked them, what do you enjoy doing? What gives you a sense of pleasure? And they've put together these often quite big lists. They sometimes run to kind of 4 or 5 pages, just covering lots and lots and lots of different kinds of things that different people enjoy doing. And I had a quick look at the one that I've got, one of the ones that I've got, and I just pulled out a few things that are possible during lockdown. And I split them into 2 lists. So I split them into a list that you could do either antenatally or postnatally with the baby or with the children, and then also things that you can do on your own that might give you a sense of pleasure. Now, these aren't going to, they don't all apply to everybody, but there might be 1 or 2 things in there that you might think, oh yes, perhaps I could give that a go. Because we know that sometimes if you're feeling a bit low, a bit fed up, it can be really hard to find the motivation and the inspiration around this stuff. It's harder to kind of pull some of these things to mind if you're feeling a bit low and a bit fed up and a bit overwhelmed with those black marbles. So that's why these lists exist, really, to give us a bit of inspiration in those moments. So as I said, this is a very, very abbreviated one. I'm going to send out a longer one with the PowerPoint slides for this presentation. But do have a look on the internet, Google them if you're interested. I haven't seen one that is specifically a pleasant events list for lockdown, under lockdown. If anybody wants to write one of those, produce one, please do, and please do share it with us. It'd be super to have. But it is quite useful just to have a glance over. It might jog your memory. You might remember doing something that you used to do, perhaps that you enjoyed doing, something that you'd like to kind of connect with again. Okay. But there is a bit of a catch with all of this, in that low mood, and particularly depression, can mean that we can't enjoy things as much as we used to. It's quite a cruel symptom of depression that actually the pleasure that we can get from something, it can be quite reduced when we're feeling low. But it's really important to remember that enjoying things a little bit is better than not at all, and it all adds up. So we know that if you can enjoy something 5%, 10%, it's better than doing something that you're going to enjoy 0%, for example. And the research in this area is really clear that these effects are cumulative, they add up. So if you can keep going with these things over 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, you do begin to notice a difference. And that sense of pleasure does build up. So if you're finding things hard for that reason, it is worth sticking at it, persevering a little bit, because it does add up. It's also worth just watching out for thoughts that might get in the way of you putting some of this stuff into practice. So things like, well, there's no point, it's useless, it's just a drop in the ocean, I won't enjoy it. And really commonly, I've got other things I have to do, I should be focusing on the baby, should be focusing on the kids. So they're quite common thoughts that might get in the way, and they are worth just watching out for. Keep an eye out for that resistance and acknowledge it. It's it's very likely to be due to the stress of the situation, the different demands, the different pressures that are on you right now. And one way to tackle that is to decide to do something pleasant anyway, to be a bit stubborn about it, to prioritise yourself for a little bit of the day. It's really important in the long run. Okay, so moving on to the second golden rule then of good mood is thinking about achievement. And there's two ways we can look at this. And the first one is just getting a little bit better at noticing and acknowledging our achievements. So I've noticed that as mums, we're really quite bad at this. We are excellent at discounting our achievements. So I've just sort of pulled an example out of thin air here around the washing. Perhaps this speaks to my particular challenges at the moment. So perhaps you've done 3 loads of washing that day, and it's taken up a fair bit of your time and your energy. And you have some thoughts about it afterwards, and you think, well, 3 loads of washing is not an achievement. Everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is managing to keep on top of their washing. It's the bare minimum I have to do, and I should have done it earlier and not let it build up. So I wonder if anybody, if that sounds familiar for anybody out there. We're pretty good at focusing on what we haven't done and ignoring what we have done. And it's really, really key, particularly at the moment, to take that time to reflect on what we have done and actually to see that for what it is. You know, doing 3 loads of washing in a day, that's pretty good going. I think a really interesting question to ask ourselves at different points in the day is, what has it taken for me to get here? So for you to tune into this webinar right now, or to tune into the pre-recorded one, set aside an hour now, to set aside an hour to do this. That's probably taken a few different things. You've probably had to sort out a few little ones to get yourself up, dressed, ready, breakfasted, or sat somewhere quiet and comfy. And it's worth just reflecting on, what has it taken for me to get here? You know, if you've had a dreadful night with the baby, just being up and sat at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee, that is an achievement in itself. And I think we really need to get a bit better at recognising that and noticing it. And it's really important to factor in your mood here as well. So when you're noticing your achievements, notice them in the context of your mood as well. So if you've been feeling low, or if you've been feeling really anxious, it's really hard to do this stuff. You know, it's really hard to do 3 loads of washing. You know, if you're constantly worrying about your parents' well-being, for example, or if you're feeling really down and really low and short on energy. So we need to factor our mood in too when we're thinking about this. You know, if you're really struggling with depression, just getting up in the morning and getting dressed is a major achievement. And we need to be really kind to ourselves and able to notice that and to see that for what it is, that achievement. And it's also worth remembering that achievements in the perinatal period will be quite different. We often don't have the same sources of reward and reinforcement that we used to. So for a lot of mums, they may previously have got their sense of achievement perhaps from work, you know, handing something in on time at college, or something like that, or supporting their friends, or, you know, taking meals round to their parents or something, and those sources of achievement and reward may not be there anymore. So sometimes our sources of achievement in the perinatal period get turned on their heads, and we do have to really shift our perspective to thinking about, well, what are the other achievements that I'm clocking up right now? So again, something to just be mindful of, and just to try and shift that perspective a little bit. Okay, so the other way to think about achievement is to set ourselves new tasks which we can take a sense of achievement from. Now may not be the time to do this. You may not have the headspace or simply enough hours in the day to be setting ourselves new tasks. But if you do, this is also a really, really good way of getting a sense of achievement. But you need to think quite carefully about what goals to set yourself, what new tasks you want to be engaging with. So they need to be achievable and realistic. So just be really careful about not setting yourself up to fail, particularly at the moment. I remember at the beginning of lockdown, I said to my husband, I'm going to try and I'm going to do some exercise every day. Did I? No, I really haven't. So that wasn't a particularly sensible task to set myself, and I did set myself up to fail. It's quite useful to think about goals in terms of them being SMART. This is quite a common framework for thinking about goals. You might be familiar with this, but it stands for making sure that your goals are specific, meaningful, achievable, realistic, and that they have a time frame as well, so time when you want to achieve them by. If you can tick those boxes, then you've got a pretty good goal ahead of you. Make sure that you break down these goals and these tasks into small parts. So don't aim to clean the entire kitchen, aim to clean one cupboard in the kitchen, for example. Or don't aim to teach your son to play the piano during lockdown, aim to teach him where middle C is or something. You get the idea. So we want to be thinking about breaking these tasks down into their smallest parts, because then we're much more able to notice the achievement, recognize the achievement, and take that from our task. Could be something that you need to do, could be a chore that you need to do that's been on your to-do list, like cleaning out the garage. Or it could be something completely new, something you've always wanted to do, like learn a language, for example. And you can adjust this as you go as well. So if you clean the garage out, you might like to set yourself another new task to do. But again, I really want to stress that this is something extra, and that you may well not have the headspace for new tasks right now. It may be much more important to focus on recognizing and acknowledging the achievements that you're kind of clocking up every single day. Okay. I also just wanted to think about compassionate thinking. This can be really, really important in helping us notice achievement. So as mums, we tend to be quite good at being quite critical of ourselves. And I think this came across in the example of the washing that I mentioned earlier. So 3 loads of washing is not an achievement. Everyone else is doing it. It's the bare minimum. I should have done it earlier and not let it build up. So that kind of self-critical thinking can really stop us noticing what it is that we are actually achieving. I'd also just like to signpost you at this point, if you're interested in this, if you think this is a bit of a problem for you, then do see webinar number 4. That was my colleague doing a webinar where she thinks a lot about this style of thinking towards ourselves. We have got links to that if you want to email Erin, whose details is on the flyer, who you will already have emailed, I suspect. Then do just drop her a note and she can send you a link to that webinar. But it's a really important one, I think, to reflect on at the moment. So that critical thinking, that kind of lack of compassion and kindness towards ourselves, can have quite a negative impact on us. It can really make us feel down. It can make us feel demotivated, demoralised, disheartened, guilty, ashamed. All sorts of really uncomfortable and painful consequences to this kind of thinking. It's often a habit as well. I think one quite powerful way to think about this is to imagine speaking to your child or your baby with that same kind of critical voice that you might speak to yourself with. And that's actually quite an uncomfortable exercise to do. You might notice quite a strong reaction. You might notice that you feel like horrified at the thought of speaking to your child in the same way that you might speak to yourself in your head. And there's a very good reason for that, because of the quite significant negative impact it would have on your child. You know, if they're always hearing that they're not doing enough, or they're not good enough, or that others are doing better than them, that's going to really make them feel quite rotten. And often this is the impact it's having on us as well. So we really need to be adopting a more compassionate thinking style. So for example, things are really hard right now. I'm putting everything I've got into occupying the kids and looking after the baby. And one way of doing this is to imagine the most compassionate person you know. It might be somebody you know, or it might be somebody from a film or somebody in the media, and just imagining how they would speak to you about this. And it's often very, very different. It can be also interesting to think about how we would speak to a friend under the same circumstances. So if a friend came to you and said, I spent the whole day doing washing, but I'm so annoyed with myself because I just shouldn't have let it get to that point. Everyone else is managing all right. You'd probably be quite quick to say back to your friend, oh, go easy on yourself. This is a tough time. You know, you're doing really well. You've cleared all the washing. That's amazing. So we're often much better at being compassionate to other people than we are to ourselves. It's worth just trying to catch those self-critical thoughts and turn them into something a bit kinder, a bit more compassionate. We all need a bit of nurturing and encouragement right now. We don't need to beat ourselves up right now. Okay, and thinking very quickly about values. So again, if you think this is interesting, please do, if you haven't already seen it, please do go and have a look at the second webinar in the series, where again my colleague talks in a little bit more detail about values. So whilst we're thinking about how we'd like to spend our day, what activities we'd like to choose to do, we may need to prioritise what activities we want to do. And we can use our values to guide us with this. So we can use our values to help us plan our days, to plan those activities into our days, to choose what we want to do. And if we ask ourselves questions like, what is important to me? What do I find meaningful? What kind of life do I want to be living, particularly now in lockdown? And what kind of mother do I want to be? Those can be quite powerful questions, and they can really make us consider how we can live our best life, our most meaningful life day to day at the moment. I think it's very common in the perinatal periods to contemplate some of these questions. What kind of mother do I want to be? What kind of partner do I want to be? So it may be something that you've already been reflecting on. And some examples of values might be caring for other people, or supporting in your community, or perhaps kind of acquiring new skills, or like continuing to learn. So they're quite big concepts. And then the idea is that you translate these big values into goals for daily life. So into something practical that you can do, hopefully every day. So for example, if you've noticed that one of your values is learning, you might like to download, for example, a language app and do 10 minutes a day. If one of your values is caring for other people, you could call a vulnerable person on your road and check in with them. Or you could commit to spending an extra 10 minutes of every day reading a book with the baby, for example. So again, this is quite a useful framework to think about this work within. What I'm going to do as well is I'm going to send out a kind of worksheet, so you can figure out what your personal values are. I'm going to send that out with these slides too. This is an example in kind of teeny tiny tiddly writing of what some examples of values might be. So I'm just going to pick out a couple. So it might be cooperation, courage, creativity, curiosity, encouragement, engagement, for example. And there are lists and lists of these as well. But it's not something that you've thought about, or if you'd like to think more about it, it is quite an interesting thing to do. It's quite revealing. And then really important to translate those into goals that you can put into practice day to day. And some of them might be pleasurable things, some of them might fit in more with the achievement golden rule. Okay. All right, and then just to think briefly about that idea about connecting with others and how important that is to our mood as well. So we are inherently social animals. We've always evolved in tribes, in packs, in herds, in groups. So it's really important for us to feel connected to other people. And we actually are finding out more and more now about how soothing social connection can be, and that's actually on a kind of physiological level. So we know that if you are struggling with a kind of threat response, if you find yourself in threat mode, which many of us may be at the moment, if you notice that you're in that fight or flight state, actually social connection can be really soothing. It can really calm down our nervous system. So it's really, really important. It's really vital to our well-being. I think another quite interesting way of thinking about this is to imagine being back in caveman times. And if we are outcast from our group, from our tribe, we just simply wouldn't survive. So lack of social connection is a real threat to us. It's as threatening as physical harm, actually. So again, this is something that's a challenge now. How can we connect socially with people that are important to us? And you might find that some sort of social connection is part of one of your values as well, often comes up as a value in some way. So we need to be prioritising this as well and scheduling this into our day. Don't let this drop off your agenda. You know, don't do the washing up instead of giving your pal a quick phone call. Put this right up there on your agenda. It's really important. Okay, the dreaded exercise. So I'm going to start off by thinking about exercise from a sort of perinatal perspective. It's really difficult in the perinatal period to get this exercise in. It can become a bit stressful, I think, for some people. So during pregnancy, there's good advice to be followed, easily found on the internet. I'm sure anybody who's in the antenatal period will be aware of this. And don't exercise before your 6-week GP check as well if you're postnatal. The 6-week checks have changed, obviously, at the moment. They're now being done online. There's a bit of variability, but in some areas, mums are being offered part of their check when they take baby for their 8-week injections as well. So you might find that you're offered it then. And do ask about exercise then, ask about what you should be doing. Again, kind of watch out for those expectations. You're going to need to be flexible. You're going to need to be flexible under lockdown conditions and postnatally, perinatally as well. You're not going to be able to stick to the same routine as you used to. So you're not going to be able to get to the gym 3 times a week or train for your half marathon. It's scary. So you need to really kind of be flexible with those expectations, and remember that a brisk walk with the buggy is good. It doesn't have to be a run or an hour's aerobics session. It can be good to have a plan A and a plan B. So if you had hoped to be able to do an online circuits class one evening, but actually the baby's really unsettled and won't go down, or you just find yourself without the energy for it, then maybe have a plan B up your sleeve to do 15 minutes of yoga with the baby next to you, or little Pilates, or just some stretching with the baby or something. it's quite easy to feel disheartened and think, well, there's just no point, I can't do this, if our plan A's don't work out, and they often don't work out. So we need to be kind of planning that flexibility into the system, and just really keeping our expectations of ourselves in check. And again, recognize those achievements, be kind to yourself, set yourself realistic targets, and really, you know, give yourself a pat on the back if you do manage to do some of this stuff, because it's tough. All right, thinking more generally about exercise then. So it has been shown to be the most reliable thing to lift our mood, even more reliable than medication and therapy. So we know that medication and therapy are both very effective for a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people. But exercise is the one thing that is guaranteed to have an impact on your neurotransmitters, and those important neurotransmitters for good mood, serotonin and dopamine. We know it also releases endorphins, which can help us feel good. Excellent for self-esteem. And it's also a really good way of managing worry, because it burns off that excess adrenaline, that kind of nervous energy. So as I've said, this doesn't have to be a marathon at all, but it does need to be something you can enjoy. And I've been really surprised at how much stuff there is popping up out there online, on Facebook, on different social media platforms. There's all sorts of things out there, and you can have fun at giving something new a try. Yeah, I hesitate to mention Joe Wicks. Some people love him, but he's out there. I did quite like the sound of these two apps. I haven't looked at them myself, but they've come through an NHS newsletter, so fairly reputable. These two apps are called Wahoo and QuickFit, and apparently they offer 7-minute workouts, which I thought sounded very excellent and potentially doable. And to think about what the recommendations are, this is based on research, this is based on what we know works. So what the recommendations are for exercise for people with depression. If you are struggling with depression, the recommendations are 45 minutes to 1 hour, 3 times a week, over 10 to 14 weeks. So it is something to stick at. Could be challenging to get in to your schedule, but again, something is better than nothing. We know with exercise, something is better than nothing. But more general kind of current advice for everyone, regardless of your mood, is to aim for 30 minutes of moderate exercise a day. And you can break that into 10-minute blocks. So again, that's not necessarily going to be easy during this time, but it's worth thinking about trying to schedule in if you can. Okay, and I did just want to also touch on the idea of motivation. So finding motivation currently could be quite challenging. As we've already thought about, we've got so much on our plates. We are spinning so many plates at the moment that it can be quite hard to muster any motivation for anything extra. We may be feeling more lethargic than normal. Low mood will do that to us, as will worry and stress and anxiety and fear. They will all make us feel tired and demotivated. However, we often tend to believe that motivation will come eventually. I know I often think like that. There's a sense that, oh, I might feel more motivated tomorrow, or just I'll feel more motivated at some point in the future. But actually, we know motivation doesn't work like this. Motivation doesn't come from nowhere. Motivation comes from action. Comes from doing things, making changes. So you may have noticed perhaps really struggling to get to the gym, for example, or to get out for a swim. But once you've done it, once you've managed to do it, then your motivation to do it again is a little bit more increased. So we sort of find that energy, that motivation, a little bit kind of boosted from having done something. So it's just worth remembering as well, I think, the motivation, if you're struggling with motivation, it's probably not going to come out of nowhere. And it's worth just trying to throw yourself into something if you can, something manageable if you can, rather than waiting for the motivation to come. Okay, so I'm getting near the end now, but I did just want to pop this in, this idea of scheduling and recording. So this can be really, really helpful to make sure that you're getting your 4 golden rules into every day. However, there's a huge caveat with this. It really mustn't be another stressor. So if you can schedule and record what you're doing and plan ahead, that's brilliant. But if you can't, that's absolutely fine too. It really mustn't be another thing to juggle. I'm going to skip ahead and just show you this chart for scheduling. I'm going to send something similar to this out with the slides, so you have got it if you want to use it. But this is a weekly activity schedule. So the idea is that you start off by monitoring what you're doing, just making brief notes here. It doesn't have to be too much. You don't have to fill every box. But just when you've done something that you notice has given you a sense of achievement or pleasure, pop it down in the diary and then pop a little A or P beside it to symbolise achievement or pleasure. And then when you come to the end of the day, it's really useful to just reflect on that day and just rate your overall mood on a scale of 0 to 10. So 0 being like really, really dreadfully low mood and 10 being really good, positive mood. So it can really help to kind of pick out patterns and to really understand the relationship between what we're doing and our mood as well. So if you can schedule and record like this, that's great. You could, if you can find some way of doing it on your mobile phone, that might be a little bit more accessible as well. If you're going to do this, it's best to do it at set intervals during the day. So when you sit down for lunch or just after you've put the kids to bed, because it tends to be quite fresh in your mind then, and you can really remember if you've enjoyed something. And then at the end of the week, look back on the week and pick out the days that you've rated as higher mood and think, well, how can I get more of that? What was good about that day? And how can I get more of that? And then schedule it in for next week, put it in the planner as well. So this can be a really helpful guide because we don't often notice those relationships. So it can be a really useful guide to use if you can fit it in. It's not going to be another chore or something else that's going to make you feel a bit overwhelmed. Okay, all right, so we've covered that. And just to finish then, I've touched on this already, but I think it's so important to really reflect on what our expectations are of ourselves at the moment and to be kind to ourselves around this. We will probably need to adjust our expectations of ourselves for now and introduce some flexibility to them. So to give you an example of this, perhaps you're somebody for whom it's really important to cook fresh food for the kids every night, or to make the baby's food fresh for him or her. And you may need to cut some corners around this just temporarily at the moment, and just allow yourself a little bit of a break from those expectations. So buying a pouch for the baby, buying the odd pizza for the kids, or the dreaded chicken nuggets. So just keep an eye on those expectations. Try not to let them get too kind of set in stone. Expectations work best when they can be flexible, when we can let ourselves off the hook a little bit. We need to be taking the shortcuts right now. These arrangements might be in place for some time yet. It has to be sustainable for everybody, and it particularly has to be sustainable for you as well. So it's this idea of putting your own oxygen mask on before you put the kids' oxygen mask on, for example. You've got to look after yourself first in order to be able to look after the kids. Right. So just a little summary then before I finish. So we've thought about how lockdown leaves us vulnerable to low mood. And how it's really important at the moment to be thinking quite proactively and quite preventatively about this. And thinking differently about how we're spending our time at the moment. We need to be following the 4 golden rules of good mood, trying to get each of these into our day if we can. So remembering activities that we can take a sense of pleasure or enjoyment from, activities we can take a sense of achievement or accomplishment or mastery from, with a particular focus on recognizing what we're already doing, I think. We need to be connecting with others, making sure that doesn't get deprioritized. And we need to be active in some way and getting a bit of exercise, because we know that for people who are feeling low, people who are struggling with depression, they just move less. We know that research has shown that. So we need to be moving, keeping active, if we can, getting a bit of exercise in. Particularly important in the perinatal period to reflect on what we can take a sense of pleasure from, what we can enjoy and what we do enjoy now. And that may need a bit of a rethink and some creativity. And also to get really good at recognizing and acknowledging our achievements, all the stuff that we're doing day to day that we don't necessarily clock. Using our personal values as a guide when we're thinking about this. So to really inform our choices about how we want to be spending our time. And turning our values into achievable daily goals so we feel like we're living a meaningful life, which is really important at the moment. Again, super important to be kind and compassionate to ourselves in our thinking style. We want to encourage ourselves, nurture ourselves a little bit. That's how we're going to protect our mood and get through this. And just always keeping an eye on those expectations and those standards, and keeping them flexible. It's just temporary. They can always return to where you want them to be after lockdown. But just making life as easy for yourself as you possibly can. Okay, so I hope there was something in there that will be useful for everybody. And I hope you can enjoy doing a few of these tasks. Some of them are quite fun homework tasks to be thinking about. If you've got any questions, please do drop us an email. I'll try to answer them as best I can. If you're going to be joining us for any future webinars, please do. If you've got any questions, let us know in advance, so we can make sure we get them into the presentation as well. Okay, so that's all from me for today. Very best of luck with this to everybody, and take good care, and hopefully see you soon.